streaming or watching after the fact. Okay, so I'm going to start today by reading our verses, and then we'll get into it. So, James chapter 4, select verses. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Maybe just a side note there. Seems a little extreme, right? I know you probably have never gone to jump that extreme position, right? If you can't have something you want, go out and kill someone. So maybe just kind of an editorial note from Jesus. You look at what Jesus says elsewhere, right? And he says, anyone that hates or harbors resentment, right, is guilty of committing murder. So we might mentally fill that in as we go through it. You desire, but you do not have, so you kill, or you hate, or you resent, or you harbor grudges. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Submit yourselves then to God. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into this city or to that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. These are verses from James chapter 4. I want to start us off with a question today, and I want us to take a minute to think through it. So I'm actually going to give us a moment of just a few seconds of silence. How many of the struggles, the headaches, and the heartaches that we have in our lives are directly tied, whether in a small way or a large way, to our desire to control, to our desire to be in control? Can you think of any situation in your life right now where things don't go your way, and what do? We rush in and we try to tighten our grip on it, and before we know it, right, we're trying to control it and manipulate the circumstances. So that it's not just kind of in the abstract, let's talk about some actual specific situations, right? We might see this play out in a number of places. I think relationships is a big one. You think about family relationships, right? The relationship between parents and children. There's a balance there, and I'm a father of a toddler and a half, 2.5-year-old, right? So I'm constantly banging my head against the wall, always trying to find that balance, and I know it gets worse. Those of you that have, okay, those of you that have kids that are a little older and a little more grown, there's that balance there, but it's so easy, and I can already feel it at 2.5, the desire, when things aren't going your way, when they're not playing out the exact way you want them to, that you want to step in and try to control and try to manipulate the situation more and get your talons in just a little deeper. And it's absolutely impossible with a toddler to corral her behavior. And I think she's going to be a wild child. I pray to God every day that she's not. But I can only imagine that it's going to be more and more difficult as they grow up. And there's that balance there. Because you want to guide and love your children and help them find their path in life. But if you overstep that bound and you control and get to that point of manipulating, truly trying to control every aspect, it can backfire. And I've seen it. And maybe you've seen it, or maybe you've experienced it. How many of our headaches and heartaches and troubles in life are tied to our insatiable need to control? It happens not just between parents and children, but in other family relationships, right, with close family or extended family, or maybe with friends as well. We think about some of the things we might like to control in those other relationships. Sometimes we want to maybe control the faith life of a person. And in doing so, we come off quite wrong, right? We can see the ways that it's harming them, and we just want to jump in and we want to take control of their faith and say, this is the way you need to live. But if you ever tried it, it backfires, and it makes a mess of things. Or maybe it's ideological differences. right? You maybe have that, and that's a big one today, friendships or acquaintances or even amongst family members. And you just wish you could jump in and say, we're going to talk this through until I force you to understand whatever this issue is from the position from which I understand it. And if you've ever tried that, you know how it goes. Sometimes it's not in a friendship or relationship. Sometimes it's just a situation in life. You've got something that's weighing on you, right? And the reality is we all have kind of this plan for our life. Maybe it's not spelled out, maybe it's not detailed, but at the very least, or for some of us, maybe it is. I know some of us are planners, and we plan things to the T, right? And that's okay. Some of us, it's just kind of this abstract concept of what life is supposed to be like for us. The way things should go, the things we should or should not achieve, the things we should or should not have to put up with, the ways we should or should not be treated or dealt with from other people. And so we get into situations each and every day when this mental image that we have of how our life should go, how we should be treated, what we should be able to put up with and not have to put up with. And when things don't go that way, what do? We tend to try to tighten our grip on it and control it and say, how can I manipulate the details of this specific situation so that I can get that outcome that I desire? Maybe just one more example, and then we'll move back to James and start to think about that a little bit. As I was thinking about it, kind of thinking of this insatiable need we have to control things and how many headaches it causes for us, I couldn't help but think of just the last couple years or the last several years in our society, right? What a mess it's been. And to a certain degree, you might chalk it up to this. We live in a nation of close to 330 million people. And a great many of those 330 million people think that if we just control the situation and do exactly what I think needs to be done, then it's all going to solve itself. There's not going to be any problems anymore. And so we just need to control, right? And so what does it result in? It results in a group of people charging this way and that way and that way and each and every other direction, demanding that we need to just control and manipulate the circumstances and the events to play out exactly as I think they should, and it will all be solved. We've seen the strife and the trouble that mindset has created. What did James say in our first verses? What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill or harbor hate or envy or distaste. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. James lays out kind of some hard truths here, right? He says, maybe not, I wouldn't say all the strife and the headaches, right? But he says, if we really think about it and if we're honest and examine our hearts and our lives, so many of those heartaches, those troubles, those trials that exist in our lives, in some way are made worse. They are worsened by our need to control and by our desire to get exactly what we want and have things our way. And so often, as James says, even when we go to God and we try to say those words, Lord, in this situation, may your will be done, he says we go with the wrong motives in verse 3 there. So often when we go to God and ask for help, it's with the wrong motives, right? The Lord's Prayer, which we say every week here at church, it has that one line, and it's so easy to let it roll off the tongue. Your will be done. Your will be done. How easy it is to say, how difficult it is to mean it. Far more often when we go to God and we're asking for help with a situation, right? Lord, please help me with this situation. It's really frustrating. It's really weighing on me. But Lord, your will be done as long as it lines up with what I want. It's so easy to do that. It's so easy to live that way. It's so difficult to say those words and truly mean it. Before we move on and get a few more verses, and I do just want to say this, don't misread me here today. This is part of that hard edge that James has that I was talking about, where everything is black and white, right? There may be some of us in this room today who walked in the door and have something really heavy in our lives, and it's weighing on us. There may be some of us in this room today who feel like our life is a mess. I know that there are still many messes and still many heartaches and trials that just seem to be increasing as life goes on these days. Just this week, I had either in conversations with individuals face-to-face or found out from somebody else 5 different situations from different parties or different groups of people that are really struggling with something right now. So here's what we're not saying today. This is what I'm leading up to. Don't misunderstand me and think that I'm saying every single problem in life, every single trial is your fault, and it's entirely on your shoulders, right? That's not what James is saying, and that's not what I'm saying. James is simply trying to get us to take a step back today and to do some heart evaluation and say, what are those troubles in my life? And does it come from misplaced motivations? Does it come from my insatiable, unquenchable need to control and to manipulate to get things exactly the way I want them? Let's flash forward just a little bit, a few verses here, and James is going to highlight the solution for us, and beginning with verse 7. Submit yourselves then to God. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. I want to start by talking about kind of what's going on with this word submit. James is saying here, right, when we have something in our life that comes up, something that is weighing on us, a trial, a trouble, what our reaction should be, what it should cause us to do by the grace of God is to pause, to take our hands off of it, and to just take a step back as we take a moment to assess, right? So those examples we started with and some of the examples that James gave, if there is friction in a relationship, if there is tension, if you have arguments that are ongoing, it seems like things are turning sour with somebody, rather than dig in and try to grip it tighter and try to control it, James here would say, and this is part of what submitting to God is, take a moment, take a step back, and take your hands off of it. That word submit in the original language as it's used here, in which it was written, a different definition, a different way to think of it is this, and it's pretty close to exactly what we have in English, right? To submit as used here is to put yourself underneath somebody. So to put yourself in a subordinate position or role. So what is James saying here? He's saying, as children of God, may God lead us to put ourselves in a subordinate position or role to God, to put ourselves underneath God. And we hear that, right? And we're like, okay, easy enough. That sounds good, right? After all, God is God, and I'm not. I don't want to be in God's position. I don't want to try to play God. How easy to say it, yet again. How easy to say it, but how difficult to live it out. Because day in and day out, that sinner is at work in us, and that sinner wants nothing more than to be God. That sinner in us thinks that it is God. And so in each and every situation that comes up in our lives, our first reaction, at least the first reaction of that sinner that is in us, and so often we fall right into the trap, so often we walk right into it over and over again, is to say, I think I know better here. And rather than, along with God's help, take a moment to step back, to take my hands off it, to assess, to put myself underneath God, I think I can handle this one. I'm going to rush in and I'm going to control and manipulate the circumstances. And what we're doing is we're letting our sinful nature lead us to play God, to try to take God's place. And you know, God is, he's patient with us, right? Day in and day out, when we rush in and try to not take the subordinate position to God, but have God take the subordinate position to us and what we want and our specific dream of what life should be, God doesn't stick his finger out and zap us, right? If he did, I wouldn't be here. because I'm a sinner, and I do that as well. But God is patient with us. And so often in this life, he works kind of behind the scenes, right? And so when you and I rush into situations and we say, okay, God, I'm going to play God on this one, God just kind of steps aside and he says, okay, give it a try. I'll be right here, right next to you, still looking out for you, still watching out for you. Just holler if you need me. And then what do? We try to play God, and before you know it, maybe it works for a little bit. You know, those of us who are especially crafty and good at arranging the situations of life, maybe it works for a little bit, but at some point, at some time, in some way, it fails us. It leaves us exhausted and frustrated and burnt out. And then right when we're there at that place where we've been trying to play God and be in his position, it's there that we throw up our hands, frustrated. We throw up our hands and say, oh, God, where are you, right? And he's still right here. So he just smiled. Sorry? I think a light went out. That was bizarre. So God is right here, and he's still right there when we're frustrated and burnt out from trying to act like we are God, and he says, how'd it go, my child? Trying to be God, how did it work for you? I love you, I care you, I've still been watching over you, I ultimately am in control, but let me just say, you look exhausted. Are you ready to find peace? Are you ready to find rest? Are you ready to let me be God? That's what's going on here with this word submit. Us trying to place ourselves in God's place. And James says, no, submit to God. Let God be God. Recognize in all things, in each moment, in every situation, that he is in the one and in control. Ultimately, let me just read these things one more time. But first, James is telling us, don't go around wasting your energy and your time trying to control what you can't control because you're not God. James is saying, focus on what you can control because God allows and enables you to as his child. And he gives us three things here, three things that with the grace of God and with his help we can control. Number one, submit yourselves then to God. Number two, come near to God and he will come near to you. And then number three, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. We've talked kind of at length about this concept of submitting to God. So let's look at number two and number three here, the things that with the strength of God who lives in us are in our control. Come near to God and he will come near to you. What is James talking about here when he says come near to God? It's not this mystical, difficult thing to understand, right? Coming near to God isn't, hey, I'm getting off the grid like for 2 weeks and you're right, throwing my cell phone and my computer in the ditch and never coming back to it, and I'm going to a mountain far away where there's no light pollution so I can see all the stars and so on and so forth, right? Don't get me wrong, vacation is important. Physical rest is important. We recharge through those things, but that's not what James is saying when he says come near to God. It's very simple. To draw near to God is to simply come to God in the places he has told us we can find him. So it seems like an easy answer. It seems like maybe we wanted something more rocket scientish. Forget that. We wanted something more complicated, right? But it's simply being here where his word is taught and read. It's being at home where we can pull the Bible out and read it for ourselves and contemplate it and meditate on it for ourselves. Maybe it's listening to a podcast. If you have a couple preachers that you like and you listen to those podcasts on your drive, or maybe it's having a Christian playlist on your phone that you put into the car when you're driving. It's being with other brothers and sisters in Christ, having conversations about God's word and studying God's word. It's that simple. When James says, come near to God and he will come near to you. Meet God where he's told us he can be found. And then that third point there, that thing that James says is in our control for all the things that aren't in our control. James says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. Similar concept, right, to submitting to God. But to come to God in humility, right? That is ultimately what is at the heart of what is wrong with us as sinners, is that we are the opposite of humble. Even if you would consider yourself a humble person, even if others tell you you're a humble person, there's still those shades of pride that always try to grow up and that always cause problems in our lives. But to come to the Lord humbly and say, God, you are God. I am not. God, you know all of it. You are in control. I don't know. I know so little. And I'm in control of basically nothing at the end of the day. 3 things that James gives us. Ultimately, it comes down to this. What is something that helps us to let God be God? It comes down to the cross and to Jesus on the cross. When we come to the cross, right, and we've been banging our heads against the wall, and I still find myself doing it, even as a pastor, find myself in that situation where I'm frustrated, I'm fed up with something, and then finally God brings me to my senses and says, you've been trying to play God again. I'm like, oh, goodness, right? And you bring it to the cross, and you lay it at the foot of the cross, and it's there. When we lay it at the foot of the cross, those ways that we have tried to play God, that he lifts our head and he says, here at the cross, you see that I am in control. I am the orchestrator of all of history, the creator of all things. And I care so deeply for you. I care so deeply about your future and each and every detail of your life. And I care so deeply that you're stuck in a world that is broken by sin and that does come with headaches and frustrations and trials, that I did something about it. I orchestrated all of it for this moment that Christ would be on the cross to pay for each and every sin so that you might have an eternity by my side. That God that orchestrated all of history to focus on that point of Jesus on the cross paying for sins, he is still intimately involved in our lives. He's still the one that is in control, even in the midst of the struggle or the trial, even in those moments when we try to put ourselves above him and play God. So we've talked about a fair amount of this, and we have 1 paragraph left, and that's kind of what we're going to wrap up with. So we've talked here about what does it look like to not play God, to submit ourselves to God, to come near to him, to humble ourselves before him so that in his time, when his timing is right and perfect, he might lift us up. And the final thing is this. James gives us a paragraph. He says, okay, so practically speaking, what does it look like? Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. James gives us just a little snapshot here. He starts with a snapshot of what it doesn't look like, right? He starts with a snapshot of what life looks like when we're trying to play God. And don't get caught up on the, we'll go spend a year there, spend a year here, carry on business, make money. I think most of us in this room don't quite operate like that. Even the most mobile in our society, right? Like if you're a military family, it's usually a couple years. But look at the concept behind it. The concept behind it being whatever plans we make, they're made with the realization, with the knowledge that God is God, that he's in control of all of it. And so we go to God, and how much we struggle with this, I'll be the first to admit it. How far sometimes do you get into your day having made your plans, having gone about doing things, and then suddenly you have this realization, where was God in all this? I just went about it, right? And I didn't even pause to ask with this situation or that situation, Lord, what would you have me do? How would you have me act? The whole message here is not that God would have you and I sit on the couch until he sends a sign about how we should do each and everything throughout our day, right? God has spoken to us in his word. The whole message here is not that when we have trials and have troubles, we are to completely disengage. No, God would have us engage. He would have us plan. He would have us make decisions. But he would have us do it not as God, but with him as God. He would have us do it as his children, always looking to, always trusting in him, that he's in control and he's working it out for our good. Amen? Amen.